7 years ago, an 18-year-old man vanished from the gated driveway of his family estate in Little Rock, Arkansas, on a late spring evening, a place that should have promised security and familiarity. It was May 2014, just after twilight, and the notion of danger never crossed the mind of those who knew him best. Police initially suggested he might have wandered off or lost track of time, an impulsive adventure that would resolve itself within hours. Yet his younger sister, who had watched him leave that evening, never believed he would vanish willingly. In the years that followed, the case sat quietly in a storage room, gathering dust and fading from the daily consciousness of investigators. But unbeknownst to the world, a routine modern process, one that would require fingerprints or DNA, would eventually collide with a trace left behind that very night, bringing the dormant mystery back into sharp focus. The gap between disappearance and eventual breakthrough would be precisely 7 years, during which Justin's absence cast a long shadow over family, friends, and the community. In the months leading up to that night, Justin had been restless yet focused, balancing late nights studying for college applications with early morning runs along the manicured paths of his neighborhood. The Patton estate was a haven of polished wood floors, marble countertops, and carefully curated artwork, a space designed to reflect order and success. His bedroom overlooked the softly lit driveway, the glow of street lamps spilling through drapes onto his neatly kept desk, where college brochures and notebooks lay stacked. He had grown accustomed to this life of predictability, where meals were punctuated with polite conversation, and evenings ended with quiet reflection under the soft hum of the chandelier light. Justin's personality radiated both confidence and curiosity. He was disciplined yet yearned for independence, often speaking of exploring the Ozarks, imagining long hikes into the wilderness as a test of resilience. Though his parents encouraged ambition, they did not fully anticipate the risks of such ventures. He carried a small notebook with sketches and notes about local trails, maps of streams and ridges, and reminders to pack essentials, a habit that spoke to his methodical yet adventurous spirit. Despite his structured upbringing, there was a subtle fragility in his confidence, an inexperience with situations beyond controlled environments that would make him vulnerable that night. As the evening progressed, on May 17, 2014, a gentle breeze rustled the magnolia trees lining the estate walls, carrying the distant chirping of cicadas. The soft crunch of gravel underfoot blended with the faint hum of cars along the nearby boulevard. Justin stepped into this ordinary night, unaware of the extraordinary disruption that would follow. Shadows stretched along the driveway, merging with the darkness of the surrounding trees. The quiet predictability of his home, a symbol of safety and privilege, would, in a matter of hours, become a haunting memory. Where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it there? Justin's life in Little Rock was framed by the meticulous rhythm of his family's gated estate and the predictable cadence of suburban privilege. The Pattons' home, perched atop a gentle rise, featured a sprawling lawn bordered by neatly trimmed hedges, and a long cobblestone driveway that led to an elegant garage where his father's luxury vehicles gleamed under motion sensor lights. Within these walls, life ran on schedules honed over years. Breakfast in the sunlit kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread filling the space, mornings spent in study or piano practice, and afternoons dedicated to tennis lessons or scouting reports for his upcoming college applications. His bedroom, a personal enclave on the second floor, overlooked the driveway and the distant tree line of the surrounding hills. It was organized with near-military precision, books aligned by height, a journal always within reach, a small framed photograph of his family smiling on vacation, and a modest guitar tucked in the corner. The room was softly scented with cedar from the wooden shelves, and the faint hum of the air conditioning created a constant, Soothing background. Justin shared the home with his parents and a younger sister, 17-year-old Emma, who often looked up to him with a mixture of admiration and quiet concern. Emma was particularly close to him, relying on Justin for guidance in academics and confiding her insecurities about social life and college preparations. Their bond was strong, rooted in shared jokes, whispered late-night conversations, and small acts of protection, like Justin checking her room for safety before going to bed. Outside the immediate family, several peripheral adults moved through the Patton household regularly. A gardener who tended the estate's formal landscaping, a delivery driver who knew the property well, and a weekend tutor who occasionally stopped by for academic sessions. All were familiar faces, yet their constant presence created a subtle permeability to the family's otherwise secure routine, a rhythm that an outsider could observe and predict if inclined. Evening rituals added a layer of quiet stability to the household. Dinner occurred promptly at 7 p.m., with conversations flowing around college plans, sports, and weekend activities. Afterward, Justin would retreat to his room, often reviewing maps of local hiking trails, carefully considering supplies and timings for his solo expeditions. Windows were left partially open during mild nights, allowing the scent of jasmine from the gardens to drift in, and the back door conveniently unlocked for ease offered a direct route to the driveway and the small wooded area behind the estate. As the sky deepened into twilight, cicadas buzzed in the surrounding trees, and the faint golden glow of the streetlights illuminated the driveway. The estate exuded calm, a fortress of familiarity, yet its very predictability, known routes, visible windows, habitual movements, laid bare a subtle vulnerability. Justin's adventurous spirit and confidence in navigating this controlled environment left him unaware of the danger. Poised just beyond the edge of the property, the family's last evening together before his disappearance was serene. Emma lingered by his bedroom door, noting the soft glow of his desk lamp and the slight rustle of papers as he packed a small day bag for an intended hike. His father, engrossed in a late-night work call, never looked up from the laptop screen, and his mother, occupied in the kitchen, hummed quietly to herself while arranging the next day's schedule. Every movement, every sound was ordinary, routine, unremarkable, yet this ordinary night would become the last imprint of normalcy for Justin in Little Rock. May 17, 2014, began like any other spring day in Little Rock, Arkansas. At 6:30 a.m., the sun crested over the rolling hills, spilling warm light across the Patton estate. Justin rose promptly, stretching before heading downstairs for a light breakfast of eggs, toast, and fresh fruit, accompanied by the quiet chatter of his family. He lingered for a few moments at the large kitchen window, eyes tracing the familiar expanse of lawn and the distant tree line where the Ozarks began to rise, already imagining the trails he would explore. By 8 a.m., he had retreated to his bedroom for a final review of hiking maps and a checklist of gear. Carefully folding a small notebook, water bottle, and first aid kit into his day pack, the morning passed with a comforting cadence. Calls with friends about weekend plans, brief emails about college applications, and a few notes on the personal journal where he cataloged thoughts and observations. Despite his self-assured demeanor, there was a subtle tension beneath the surface, an eagerness to prove his independence, tempered by inexperience with the unpredictable world beyond the gated estate. It was this delicate balance between confidence and vulnerability that would soon be tested in ways he could not foresee. By late afternoon, Justin had slipped quietly into his hiking boots, double-checking that the back door latch was secure, yet easy to reopen. The sun was beginning its descent at 5:10 p.m., casting long shadows across the driveway. The air held the earthy scent of warm soil and budding magnolias, and the soft chorus of birdsong intermingled with distant traffic hum. His sister Emma lingered in the hallway, half watching him while pretending to focus on her phone. She noticed the determined set of his jaw, a slight bounce in his step as he hoisted the pack over his shoulder, and a fleeting look toward the trees at the estate's edge. Something instinctive told her this would not be a casual stroll, though she could not articulate why. Night approached with subtle shifts in light and temperature. By 8:15 p.m., the first stars blinked overhead, and a gentle breeze carried the faint rustle of leaves. The household had settled into its evening routines. His mother tidied the kitchen, his father reviewed notes at his study, and Emma lingered by her bedroom door, half awake and half curious. From her vantage point, she glimpsed movement near the back of the house, a shifting shadow that seemed to pause and then move along the edge of the driveway. Her heart quickened, a surge of alarm she dismissed as imagination. After all, the lights were on inside, the house secure, and Justin never wandered off alone in the dark. She coaxed herself into calm, telling herself it was a trick of the fading light. By 10:30 p.m., the house was quiet. Justin's room glowed softly from the desk lamp, illuminating sketches of trail paths and notations of streams and rocks. Somewhere in the distance, the low hum of a late-night vehicle passed along the neighborhood street. Emma, unable to sleep, dozed in the hallway chair, half watching and half listening. Then came the faintest sound of gravel shifting outside the back entrance, so soft it could have been the wind, or so she hoped. Moments later, silence resumed, leaving only the soft ticking of the clock. Morning broke with a jarring clarity. At 6:45 a.m., Emma rose, calling for her brother. No answer. Panic began as she checked his room. The desk lamp still on, his day pack gone, the window slightly ajar. The back door showed no sign of forced entry, yet footprints in the damp earth behind the house suggested otherwise. Small scuff marks led toward the wooded edge, and a solitary item, his water bottle, lay forgotten in the grass. Confusion and fear escalated rapidly into undeniable alarm. The certainty that Justin would return on his own evaporated in a heartbeat. The first patrol car arrived within minutes, sirens soft against the morning breeze. Officers took careful notes, photographing the disturbed grass, the footprints, and the lone item left behind. Emma recounted, with shaky breath, the shadow she had seen the previous night, her voice measured yet laced with dread. These fragments, dismissed by some as a dream, now gained weight in the unfolding reality of Justin's disappearance. And if stories like this keep you pulled in, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss what comes next. The first full day of searching for Justin unfolded with a tense, almost surreal energy. Sheriff's deputies arrived early, moving methodically through the Patton estate with notebooks and cameras in hand, recording every detail of the driveway, back door, and the soft, rolling lawn that led toward the wooded edge of the property. The wind shifted occasionally, carrying scents of wildflowers and damp earth, and the officers noted the faint hum of distant traffic, birdsong, and the ever-present rustle of leaves ambient, sounds that underscored the stillness of the missing young man's absence. Inside the home, the deputies meticulously documented Justin's bedroom. His desk, once orderly, bore the subtle signs of his last movements. A notebook slightly askew, a pen rolled to the edge of the surface, a backpack absent from its usual corner. Windows were measured, doors inspected, locks tested, and the slight draft carrying the jasmine from the garden outside was noted as a possible point of egress. Emma recounted, in careful detail, the shadow she had glimpsed the night before. Though some officers initially doubted her account, it was formally written into the report. Each nuance captured: the fleeting movement, the pause at the back entrance, the sense of presence near the driveway. The search quickly expanded beyond the estate. Neighbors were enlisted, volunteers from the surrounding community joined in, and canine units were called to the scene. Teams combed nearby fields, small creeks winding toward the foothills of the Ozarks, and the narrow paths that threaded through dense brush and low-lying trees. Each footstep, each carefully scanned patch of earth, was treated as potentially significant, every sound and movement interpreted against a backdrop of fear and hope. Near the edge of the trees, searchers discovered small but telling clues: a water bottle, partially obscured in tall grass, shallow scuff marks suggesting hurried movement, an adult-sized footprint pressed into soft earth, directionality indicating someone had led him into the wooded perimeter rather than away from it, and patches of flattened vegetation as if someone had paused, knelt, or momentarily halted along the path. Evidence bags were carefully labeled, photographs taken, and the items transported back to the sheriff's office with meticulous attention. The technology of the era was limited. Photographs were still developed from film, and fingerprints could only be analyzed manually, but the signs collectively indicated an abduction rather than voluntary departure, even as volunteers swept the surrounding areas. The emotional weight of the day pressed heavily on the community. Parents of children Justin's age lingered at the perimeter, their eyes scanning the tree line with a mixture of anxiety and empathy. The deputies, while professional and composed, could not hide the tension etched across their faces as they considered the implications of the scattered evidence. Something deliberate had occurred here, something that had taken a young man from the safety of his home into the uncertainty of the night. By late afternoon, the sheriff stood silently near the edge of the property, surveying the footprints and flattened grass as the shadows lengthened. He traced the likely path into the forest with his gaze, the realization settling in that this was far more than a teenage misadventure. The ordinary, serene neighborhood, once a symbol of security, now seemed fragile, permeable, a place where a single night could irreversibly alter lives. As the sun dipped behind the distant trees, the first hint of unease among the search team solidified into grim acknowledgement. Justin Patton's disappearance was not a fleeting incident. The signs pointed unmistakably to a calculated act, one that had taken him from his family's home and left only fragments in its wake. Back at the sheriff's office, the investigation shifted from the sprawling outdoor search to careful reconstruction of the events leading to Justin's disappearance. Officers pored over the photographs of the flattened grass, the scuff marks, the lone water bottle, and the adult-sized footprints leading into the Ozark foothills. Maps were spread across the table, windows of the office casting long, angular shadows over the evidence. The sheriff and his deputy, experienced but constrained by the tools of 2014, began connecting the fragments. Nothing suggested voluntary departure. It was increasingly clear Justin had been taken. The case was formally reclassified as an abduction missing person, a decision that carried weight and urgency but offered little concrete progress. Early suspect lists were drawn with careful attention to access and opportunity. Gardeners, delivery personnel, neighbors, and any adult who had legitimate reason to be on or near the property were considered. One individual, a part-time landscape worker who had been present on the estate that week, drew particular attention. Records showed he had been in the area during the critical evening, and minor inconsistencies in his accounts raised suspicion. Investigators scrutinized him, noting every possible opportunity and motive, every detail that might link him to Justin's disappearance. Interrogations were conducted with methodical precision. As the officers' questions unfolded, inconsistencies appeared, but objective evidence ultimately exonerated him. Shoe prints collected from the property were inconsistent with the suspect's footwear. Work logs and surveillance footage confirmed his presence elsewhere during the key hours, and medical records showed he had a physical limitation that made traversing the uneven wooded terrain implausible. The exoneration, while necessary, deepened the tension, reinforcing the notion that the abduction had been carefully planned and executed. Searches expanded, encompassing the surrounding woods, nearby streams, and roads extending toward the outskirts of Little Rock. State and federal agencies provided advisory support, reviewing case files and noting the controlled, confident nature of the abduction. It was the kind of operation that suggested a familiarity with the terrain and a calm, deliberate approach. Yet, despite exhaustive efforts, no further physical evidence or credible witnesses emerged. No ransom demands appeared. No unknown vehicles were identified, and leads that once seemed promising dissolved into dead ends. After weeks of intense effort, the case began to stall. With no new evidence and investigative resources stretched thin, administrative decisions were made to classify the file as inactive, moving it to the cold case archives. The impact on the Patton family was profound. Grief, guilt, and unresolved fear settled into daily life. Emma carried the silent weight of having glimpsed a shadow the night her brother vanished. Their parents bore the torment of uncertainty, alternating between hope and despair. For the sheriff and deputy, the file became a quiet, nagging wound, a reminder of limits imposed by both human and technological constraints, as the final act of the administrative process. The box containing Justin's name, the collected evidence, and all notes from the investigation was carefully labeled and placed on a high shelf in the records room, a fragile repository of memory and hope. Dust began to gather, the fluorescent lights above casting long, cold shadows over the inert case materials. If you want to know what investigators uncovered next, go ahead and like this video. Years passed quietly over the Patton estate and the surrounding Little Rock community. Streets shifted subtly. Small businesses opened and closed. New developments crept into formerly empty lots, and the rhythms of life carried on, largely indifferent to the absence of one young man. Within the sheriff's office, personnel changed, filing systems evolved, and a glow of fluorescent lights illuminated more modern workstations, replacing the stacks of paper and manila folders that had once dominated the room. The box containing Justin's case, once central to urgent discussions, now gathered dust on a high shelf, its presence nearly forgotten except by those who had touched it. When hope was still vivid, the box itself survived through an almost accidental series of preservations. A minor roof leak that could have ruined the contents was patched just in time. A departmental purge of inactive files spared it at the last moment. Digitization projects skimmed past it, leaving the evidence intact, a silent witness to the passage of time. It remained closed, waiting, as if sensing the eventual collision with a moment yet to come. Meanwhile, the Patton family aged under the shadow of unresolved grief. Anna, having grown into adulthood, carried the memory of her brother's disappearance like a subtle ache, sometimes retreating to photographs, sometimes avoiding them altogether. Their parents retired from professional careers, shuffled between hope and resignation, holding on to the possibility of a return that never came, each year etching lines of weariness into their faces. Friends and extended family moved forward, but the memory of Justin lingered, a persistent ghost in conversations and celebrations in parallel. Justin lived elsewhere, unknown to those who loved him, under a name that was not his own. The life he led was patterned and cautious, shaped by routines that masked his true identity. Teachers, employers, and neighbors sensed a quiet difference about him, a trace of unease. But the era offered no tools to question inconsistencies deeply, and the fragmented record-keeping of the early 2010s left no cross-checks between regions. His inner world was fractured, fleeting memories of home, smells, faces, and voices he could not place haunted him, leaving an enduring sense of displacement and uncertainty. Retired officers who had worked on the original case still carried it quietly, recollections surfacing with particular clarity during administrative reviews or casual conversations. The sheriff, now older, sometimes returned to the storage room, peering at the shelf where the box sat, feeling the weight of the years in the dust and the silence surrounding it. Each time, he thought of Justin, not the figure in a file, but the young man whose life had been interrupted, whose absence shaped the community and the family he left behind. The world moved on, yet the silent box remained, a repository of clues, small fragments, and memories preserved with care. Somewhere, beyond the gaze of any officer, Justin continued to navigate a life that was real and lived but not entirely his own, a life of quiet displacement, waiting for the day when evidence and circumstance would converge to reveal the truth. If you could tell someone what really happened all those years ago, who would you speak to first? The closed, surviving box remained on the shelf, an unspoken promise of stories yet to be told. Under a new name, Justin had grown into adulthood in a life carefully constructed around routine and quiet compliance. At 25 years old in 2021, he lived modestly in a small apartment in a neighboring county, employed at a local library and taking graduate courses online. His existence was orderly, yet subtly hollow records showed a fabricated birth date, inconsistencies in school transcripts, and a lack of verifiable family history. Each form, each application, carried a careful avoidance of questions that might expose the truth. The era of digital record-keeping and cross-reference databases had not yet reached the point of fully illuminating his hidden past, and the papers that could have unraveled him were scattered and siloed across jurisdictions. Justin's inner life was a quiet storm of displacement. Fragments of memory emerged at unexpected moments. The scent of cedar shelves, the soft hum of a piano, the way magnolia trees swayed in a warm breeze. He sometimes paused during long walks in the park, feeling flashes of familiarity with landscapes he had never been able to place. His sense of self was fractured, the reflection in the mirror only partially aligned with the man he knew himself to be. There were moments of unease and yearning he could not articulate, a longing for a home whose existence he could barely recall. Routine provided both structure and protection. He attended work punctually, greeted patrons with a quiet politeness, and followed a strict schedule for meals, exercise, and study. Yet there was always a subtle vigilance, an instinctive awareness of the fragility of the life he had been given. The papers, IDs, and certificates that allowed him to navigate the world also formed a cage, one whose bars were invisible but inescapable. Everything changed when a routine, administrative requirement triggered the first breach in his carefully constructed world. Following the death of a distant legal guardian who had overseen the documentation of his false identity, Justin was required to submit fingerprints for estate verification and inheritance purposes. The small act, intended as a bureaucratic formality, would intersect with the dormant evidence preserved from that night in May 2014. His prints, entered into the state database, automatically matched a fingerprint collected from the back door of the Patton estate, a trace that had been cataloged and stored meticulously by the original investigators. The alert arrived swiftly in the hands of a modern cold case investigator, trained to sift through long and active files and recognize patterns invisible to earlier generations of law enforcement. The investigator pulled the case box from storage, dust motes catching the light as the folder was opened to reveal photographs, handwritten notes, and evidence bags, each one a frozen moment from 7 years prior. The realization settled in slowly. The young man who had vanished so abruptly was alive, living a life built on erasure, now re-emerging into the world he had left behind. The collision of past and present was profound, both procedural and profoundly human. Every step of Justin's hidden life now became a thread connecting to the unresolved night of his disappearance. And the modern investigator faced the delicate task of bridging decades of absence with the truth that had finally found a path to revelation. If you could tell someone what really happened all those years ago, Who would you speak to first? The cold case investigator approached Justin Patton's file with meticulous care, aware that every photograph, note, and evidence bag carried decades of unanswered questions. In the quiet of a modern office, with some light muted by blinds and the faint hum of computers in the background, the investigator spread out the original documentation, the photographs of the flattened grass behind the Patton estate, the adult-sized footprints, the water bottle left in the brush, and the handwritten reports that had guided the initial search. Each piece was scrutinized anew, not as fragments of a stalled case, but as active clues awaiting interpretation through the lens of contemporary forensics. Laboratory analysis began immediately. Soil from the footprints was compared to samples taken from known locations associated with the abductor, revealing an uncanny match that suggested intimate familiarity with the wooded areas surrounding the Ozarks. Fibers collected from the backpack and water bottle were sent for detailed examination, identifying synthetic threads consistent with clothing often worn by the abductor decades earlier. Advanced software analyzed the old photographs, overlaying topographical maps with modern satellite imagery to reconstruct the likely path Justin had been led along that fateful night. Shoe tread analysis linked the prints from the scene to a specific brand and style commonly associated with outdoor work boots, narrowing the pool of potential abductors and corroborating records of known individuals in the region at the time. Utility bills, property records, and local tax documents were cross-referenced, placing the primary suspect in proximity to the Patton estate on multiple occasions during the critical week. Gaps in employment and travel records aligned with the night of the disappearance, offering the first concrete timeline of opportunity. Piecing these threads together, the investigator constructed a detailed chronology, the calculated movements of the abductor, the deliberate choice of terrain, and the methods by which Justin had been removed from the home without immediate detection. The patterns were deliberate, controlled, and chillingly precise, an adult with familiarity with both the terrain and the family's routines, capable of manipulating circumstances to achieve concealment over years. Administrative records further reinforced the identity of the abductor, now revealed as a person whose movements and behaviors had been largely overlooked in the initial investigation. Employment histories, residence changes, and long-term connections to local communities explained the ability to maintain a hidden presence and manipulate documentation to sustain the false identity imposed on Justin. Though the abductor was no longer alive, the archival evidence allowed investigators to formally designate them as the primary offender, bringing clarity to decades of ambiguity. With the abductor identified, attention shifted to the living victim. The investigator prepared to inform Justin of the breakthrough, balancing procedural precision with sensitivity to the psychological impact. Files were organized, notes reviewed, and plans made for the introduction. A careful convergence of forensic truth, administrative clarity, and human empathy. The moment of revelation would not only restore Justin's identity, but also illuminate the path by which his life had been diverted for so many years. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional tapping of a keyboard. Each document, each bag of evidence, was a bridge across time, connecting the night in 2014 to the present day, and preparing both the investigators and the victim for the emotional confrontation with the past. Justin Patton sat quietly in the small conference room, the late morning sun slanting through blinds and casting striped shadows across the table. Across from him, law enforcement officials laid out the chronology of events, the evidence meticulously cataloged. The fingerprints and DNA from the 2014 scene now linked unmistakably to him. The words were clinical, precise, yet each one carried the weight of decades-long absence. Justin felt a strange dissonance. The life he had known under another name pressed against the memory of the boy he once was. and the reality of his abduction suddenly became undeniable. Shock gave way to disbelief, disbelief to grief, and grief to a cautious, reluctant relief. DNA confirmation followed swiftly. Samples were taken from surviving relatives, his mother, father, and Emma. Modern testing, sensitive and thorough, verified a direct bloodline match. Every result reinforced the certainty that Justin had not vanished into thin air. He had been taken, concealed, and forced into a fabricated identity. The scientific affirmation grounded what intuition had long whispered, transforming decades of uncertainty into factual clarity. The first in-person reunion with his original family was both tender and jarring. Emma approached first, hesitantly, her eyes searching for traces of the brother she had known. Recognition came in fragments, a shared smile, the tilt of his head when listening, the subtle expressions that echoed childhood moments. Their mother, tearful but composed, reached out, brushing fingers over his hand in disbelief and wonder. His father observed quietly, absorbing the reality of a son returned yet irrevocably changed by lost years. Memories surfaced in small, vivid ways. The sound of rustling leaves recalled the hike that had begun it all. A cedar scent reminded him of his bedroom shelves. Shared stories, phrases, and mannerisms bridged the years, yet the gaps were undeniable. Justin struggled to integrate the identity he had been forced to assume with the one that had been stolen from him. He was both the young man from Little Rock and the adult who had navigated a life of careful concealment. The family grappled with their own emotions, joy intertwined with sorrow, relief shadowed by anger at the abductor, and grief for the irreplaceable years lost. The cold case investigator, present for the revelation, marked the file as resolved, but understood that resolution on paper did not equate to personal closure. Healing, reconciliation, and the integration of two lifetimes would take far longer. The case was closed procedurally, but emotionally it had just begun to unfold, offering a path toward restoration and understanding rather than neat finality. Justin and his family lingered, together long after formalities concluded. The room filled with quiet conversation, shared memories, and the subtle recognition that while the past could never be reclaimed, the present now carried the weight of truth and the possibility of rebuilding bonds fractured by time and circumstance. With Justin's identity confirmed and the evidence pointing clearly to the abductor, law enforcement formally updated the case records. The abductor was officially named as the primary offender, and the incident reclassified as an abduction consistent with the legal terminology of 2014. Though the individual could no longer face trial, their actions were documented and preserved for the historical record, ensuring that the truth of Justin's stolen years was recognized and recorded. Questions remained unanswered. Motives could only be inferred from the patterns of behavior and the meticulous planning evident in the crime, but the full reasoning behind the abduction would never be known. Investigators reflected on whether earlier interventions could have altered the outcome, recognizing that the era's technological limitations, the gaps in cross-jurisdictional record-keeping, and the reliance on physical evidence left critical vulnerabilities unaddressed. There was no certainty that any investigator could have prevented Justin's hidden years. Yet the lessons from the case became painfully clear. The systemic implications were stark. Evidence preservation proved its worth. Fingerprints, fibers, and photographs from 2014 survived intact, bridging the temporal gap until modern forensic technology could apply them. Biometric databases, once nascent or non-existent, revealed their power to reconnect lives severed by crime. The importance of documenting and revisiting early witness accounts, even when initially doubted, was highlighted as essential. Emma's fleeting observation of a shadow the night of the disappearance had become a pivotal thread in reconstructing events. Cross-agency communication and thorough archival management were validated as crucial safeguards against the erasure of memory and justice. For Justin and his family, the resolution carried complex emotional weight. The restoration of his true identity represented a profound form of justice, one that could not undo the past, but could reclaim agency and dignity. The reunion illuminated the depth of loss endured by all involved. The stolen moments of adolescence and early adulthood now juxtaposed with the reality of survival under a false identity. Healing would be gradual, nuanced, and layered, demanding acknowledgement of sorrow alongside gratitude for the present. The case stood as a testament to perseverance across decades, the patience of investigators, the preservation of evidence, and the gradual alignment of circumstance and technology that ultimately restored a life that had been nearly erased. It underscored that truth, though delayed, carries transformative power, reshaping the way lives and histories are understood. Justin's story, while marked by trauma and absence, became one of reconnection, identity reclamation, and the fragile but enduring promise that even lost years can be acknowledged and honored. And when you're ready, click the video on the right to explore another case.